The Sword Without a Master. A Cold Reckoning original story PRT1. The Dig. The sword was pointing straight up. That was the first thing Dr. Mara Lindqvist noticed when the brush cleared the last layer of soil from the burial mound outside Trondheim, Norway, on a Tuesday morning in October. No body, no bones, no grave goods. Just iron, dark, ancient, and deliberate driven blade down into the earth. Its hilt rising toward a gray sky like a frozen prayer, or a curse. Mara had been excavating Viking sites for 19 years. She had pulled axes from the hands of warriors dead 1,000 years. She had found infants buried with amber beads, women interred with keys around their necks, keys to households that no longer existed, symbols of authority that outlasted every wall they once locked. She thought she had seen everything the Norse dead could offer. She had not seen this. "It's not a cenotaph," she said to her assistant Jonas, who was already photographing the find. "Cenotaphs still have grave goods. This is staged." Jonas lowered his camera. "What do you mean, staged?" "It's not a cenotaph," she said to her assistant Jonas, who was already photographing the find. "Cenotaphs still have grave goods. This is staged." Jonas lowered his camera. "What do you mean, staged?" Mara crouched at the edge of the pit and studied the hilt. The crossguard was intact. The grip was wrapped in something that had mostly rotted away, organic material perhaps, leather or wood fiber. But the blade itself was in extraordinary condition. No corrosion spoke to what the Norse called sæther, magic, intention, deliberate preservation. "Someone put this here on purpose," she said. "Someone who didn't want to be found." She was right. She just didn't know yet that the story behind the sword would reach all the way into her own department, her own university, her own bed. Part 2. The Woman in the Painting. The story truly begins in the year 1200 AD. Her name was Sigrid Ironveil, and she was considered the most dangerous woman in the Trøndelag region, not because she carried a blade, but because she didn't need one. She was the widow of Jarl Ulfar the Red, a warlord who had died of fever 3 winters before our story opens, leaving behind 2 things: a chest of silver that could buy a fleet, and a hall full of men who wanted it. Sigrid was 31. She had dark eyes that people described as the color of a fjord in November, cold and deep and impossible to read the bottom of. She had borne Ulfar 3 sons, all of whom had died in their first year. The Norse whispered that her womb was cursed. She did not correct them. It was useful to be underestimated. The silver was real. The fleet it could buy was real. And there were 3 men circling Sigrid's hall like wolves circling the last fire before winter. The first was Hakon Skald's brother, Ulfar's own nephew. He was 26, beautiful in the way that sharp things are beautiful, all cheekbones and dangerous smiles. He believed the silver was his by blood, and he believed Sigrid would eventually understand this. He was the kind of man who confused patience for kindness. The second was Ivar the Quiet, a trader from the south who had done business with Ulfar for a decade. He was 40, methodical, and had accumulated enough of his own wealth that his interest in Sigrid was not primarily financial. He had been in love with her for years with the slow, grinding dedication of a millstone. Not passionate, but impossible to stop. He brought her gifts she never asked for and advice she never took, and somehow never seemed to understand that this was not a foundation. The third was Leif Stornborn, and he was something else entirely. Leif was a skald, a poet, a storyteller, a keeper of memory. He had arrived at Sigrid's hall 3 months after Ulfar's death, carrying nothing but a lute harp and the most beautiful voice anyone in the hall had ever heard. He sang of distant battles. He sang of sea crossings. He sang, one night, of a woman whose beauty was so terrible it had ended a war. And he looked at Sigrid the entire time. Sigrid had not planned to fall in love, but the body, it seems, does not always consult the mind. Part 3. The Silver and the Lie. Within a month, Leif was warming Sigrid's bed. Within 2, he was warming her ear. Hakon will move against you before winter, he told her one night, his fingers tracing the scar on her collarbone she'd gotten in a riding accident at 14. He's been meeting with the Thanes. 2 of them are already his. Sigrid had known this. What she hadn't known was how Leif knew it. Who told you? She asked. I have ears everywhere, he said. It's what poets are for. People speak freely around us. They think we only listen for metaphors. She laughed. She should not have laughed. The truth was simpler and more terrible. Leif was working for Ivar. Ivar the Quiet had understood something about Sigrid that Hakon never had, that she could not be taken by force. She was too clever, too connected, too proud. But she could be maneuvered. If someone she trusted told her the right things at the right time, she would make decisions that benefited someone else, while believing she was acting for herself. The plan was elegant. Leif would make Sigrid love him, trust him. And then, when the time came, he would advise her to sign the silver over to Ivar as a business partnership, a protection arrangement against Hakon's aggression. Ivar would get the wealth. Leif would get a percentage in passage on a ship south to Constantinople, where he had always wanted to go. Sigrid would be left with a haul, a broken heart, and nothing else. It would have worked, too. It almost did. Except for one thing. Leif made the mistake of actually falling in love with her. Part 4. The forgery. 6 weeks before the deal was to be signed, Leif did something that changed everything. He told Sigrid the truth. Not all of it, not Ivar's name, not his own role, but enough. Enough for her to understand that someone in her circle was playing a longer game than she'd realized. He told her the silver was being watched, that Hakon's aggression was being quietly encouraged by a third party, that she needed to move the chest before the winter solstice, or she would lose it. Why are you telling me this? She asked. He was quiet for a long time, because I would rather be poor in the south than rich in a story that ends with your ruin, he said. She looked at him for a very long time, and then she made a decision that Leif would never fully understand. Not a decision of the heart, but of strategy. She filed the confession away like a weapon and said nothing. She moved the silver that night, not far. She didn't have to move it far. She moved it into a different location and told 3 different people, 3 different locations. Then she waited. Within a week, she knew which of her thanes had been bought. Within 10 days, she had confirmed the third party. And when Ivar arrived at her hall with a contract already drafted, wearing his most expensive cloak and his most reasonable expression, Sigrid was sitting at the high seat with 2 armed household guards flanking her, and a copy of a letter. A letter she had obtained through channels Ivar would never trace. That detailed every step of his plan. Ivar read the letter. His face went through several colors. Then he composed himself. I can explain. I know, Sigrid said. That's why I'm not having you killed. She paused. I'm having your ship seized instead. Part 5. Hakon's gambit. Ivar's disgrace was swift and total. Without his financial backing, the thanes who had aligned with Hakon lost their nerve one by one. It was supposed to be over. Hakon did not behave as if it was over. Hakon's scout's brother was, at his core, a man who had never truly been denied anything. He had Ulfar's bloodline, Ulfar's name, Ulfar's face in the mirror every morning. He had always believed the hall and the silver would come to him eventually, the way inheritance comes, through patience and gravity. The fact that a woman was preventing this did not frighten him. It insulted him. He came to Sigrid's hall on a cold morning in December with 6 armed men and a gift, a golden bracelet that had belonged to Ulfar's mother. A peace offering, he said. Sigrid accepted the bracelet. She set it on the table between them without putting it on. What do you want, Hakon? A marriage, he said. It solves everything. Your silver becomes family silver. Your hall becomes a family hall. The thanes consolidate. No more scheming, no more danger. And what do I become? She asked. He smiled. It was not an unkind smile. That was almost the worst thing about him. You become the wife of the next Jarl. Sigrid was quiet for a moment. She picked up the bracelet and turned it in her fingers. I'll give you my answer in 3 days, she said. Hakon nodded, satisfied. He understood silence as consideration. He had never learned to read Sigrid's particular kind of silence, which was not consideration at all. It was preparation. Part 6. The sword that night, Sigrid went to the locked chest where she kept Ulfar's weapons, his axe, his shield, his sword. The sword was the finest blade the blacksmith had ever made. It had a name, as all great Norse swords did, Grimhjara, Dark Heart. She sat with it for a long time. There are things that don't appear in the sagas, things the skalds left out because they didn't witness them or didn't understand them, or chose not to record them. One of those things is what women did with their grief when no one was watching. Ulfar had not been a kind man, but he had been a fair one, and in the 10 years of their marriage he had never tried to make her smaller. That, she had come to understand, was rarer than silver. She made her decision. She sent for Leif. He came quickly, as he always did, and she saw in his face the specific fear of a man who knows he is not entirely forgiven and is not certain what form the accounting will take. I know what Ivar paid you, she said. I know what you were supposed to do. He did not deny it. She had expected him to. She had prepared arguments. His honesty, again, disarmed her. I'm sorry, he said. I know, she said. That's also not why I called you. She told him her plan. He listened without interrupting, which was unusual. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. If this works, he said, you lose everything that can be taken. Yes, she said. That's the point. And if it doesn't work, she looked at him with those fjord-colored eyes. Then I lose everything anyway. At least this way, it's on my terms. Part 7. The reckoning on the 3rd day, Hakon returned for his answer. He brought the same 6 men. He wore his best cloak. He had already begun, in his mind, to think of the hall as his. Sigrid was waiting at the high seat. Leif was there, to one side, his harp silent in his lap. 2 thanes flanked her, but not the ones Hakon had bought. Different ones. Ones he'd never bothered to cultivate because they had seemed unimportant. They were not unimportant. Your answer? Hakon said. My answer is no, Sigrid said. And my counteroffer is this. You leave Troindelag before the first thaw. You take nothing. That was Ulfar's. You do not speak my name again in any hall, at any fire, to any man. Hakon stared at her. And if I refuse? Sigrid set a piece of parchment on the table. These are sworn statements from 4 of your own men, attesting to the meeting you held in Ivar's storehouse in November. The one where you agreed to a plan that constituted treason against the sitting widow of a Jarl under Norse law. The color left Hakon's face. The Althing convenes in 3 weeks, she continued. I can have you brought before it in chains, or I can have you gone before it assembles. Choose. The 6 armed men looked at each other. Then they looked at Hakon. Then, one by one, they took a small step back. The subtle, devastating rearrangement that signals that men have assessed the situation and decided which way the wind is blowing. Hakon looked at the parchment. He looked at Sigrid. He looked at the door. He chose the door. Part 8. The sword in the earth. But Sigrid was not finished. She had dismantled Ivar's scheme. She had driven Hakon into exile. But she understood something that most people in power fail to understand. The danger isn't the men who come at you with force. It's the idea that you can be taken, that you are available, that your haul, your silver, your body are prizes in a contest she never agreed to enter. She needed to end the game, not just win a round. She called her blacksmith and gave him an instruction that surprised him deeply. She told him to build a burial mound, not for a body, but for a sword. Grimhjarta, Dark Heart, to be set in the earth pointing upward, blade down, hilt to the sky. No grave goods, no animal sacrifice, no body, Just the sword. What does it mean? The blacksmith asked. It means the master is not dead, she said, and is not coming back, and does not need a blade. The Norse understood symbolism the way modern people understand language, instinctively, completely, without needing to be taught. A sword in the burial mound with no body meant one thing across the entire region within a year. The Jarl of this hall is without limit. She has buried her weapon. She no longer needs it. Whatever comes for her will not find what it expects. No one came for the silver again. Part 9. What Leif chose Leif did not go to Constantinople. This surprised him. He had been going to Constantinople in his mind for years. The mosaics, the warmth, the long golden afternoons, the markets that sold spices from the edge of the world. He had the passage arranged. He had Ivar's percentage, reduced but still considerable, still enough. He stayed anyway. He is not the hero of this story. He had done a cowardly thing, and then a brave thing, and those two things do not cancel each other out. They coexist in a person, which is the uncomfortable truth about humans that the sagas, with their clean moral architecture, often fail to convey. Leif was not a good man who had made a mistake. He was a complicated man who had made a consequential choice. Sigrid knew this. She did not forgive him easily or completely. She offered him a role, official skald of the hall, and she was honest about what she was doing. I'm keeping you close because you're useful, she said, and because your voice is beautiful, and because you owe me a story that doesn't end with my defeat. And the rest? He asked. What we were? She was quiet for a long time in the way she always was. The fjord, silence, the unreadable depth. Ask me again in a year, she said. He asked her again in a year. The answer was not a simple one, but it was, on balance, 1,000 years later. Dr. Mara Lindqvist published her findings on the sword burial in March of the following year. The paper was meticulous. Carbon dating, isotopic analysis, soil composition, metallurgical examination. Grimhjarta dated to the early 11th century. The blade contained trace minerals consistent with a high-quality forge in what is now central Norway. The burial was intentional, constructed with care, and this was the part that electrified the academic community. Associated with no death. The paper was titled, Symbolic Weapon Internment as Political Communication in Viking Age Norway, a Case Study. It went modestly viral for an archaeology paper. What Mara could not include in the paper, what no soil sample or spectral analysis could recover, was the name of the woman who had put the sword there. That was gone. The sagas did not record her. She had not wanted to be recorded. She had wanted to be understood, which is different. But the sword understood. Swords remember in their own way, in iron and in tension, in the fact of their burial, in the question they pose to anyone who finds them. Why bury a blade with no body? Why plant a weapon like a seed? The answer, 1,000 years later, was the same as it had been the day Sigrid spoke it to her blacksmith, because the master is not dead, and is not coming back. Mara stood at the edge of the excavation pit in the gray October light, and looked at the sword one more time before the preservation team came to move it. She had no way of knowing why, exactly, it made her feel the way it did. Like something was watching her, not malevolently, but with attention, with recognition, the way a person looks at you when they already know your name. She chalked it up to professional awe. She was probably right. Epile. The cold reckoning, there's a concept in Norse law called need, a formal declaration of shame, a public statement that a person has acted dishonorably and must be answered for it. It's usually translated as vengeance, but that's not quite right. The Norse word contains something the English translation loses. The idea that the accounting was always coming. That consequences are not punishments imposed from outside, but weight accumulated inside, waiting for the moment when it becomes too heavy to carry. Ivar the Quiet died poor, in a village 3 days' ride from Trondheim, having lost his ships, his contracts, and eventually his reputation, to a series of decisions that he always, until the end, attributed to bad luck. Hakon Skald's brother returned to Trondelag 10 years later, after Sigrid had died of old age. She lived to 63, remarkable for the era, and found that the hall was held by her chosen heir, a younger woman she had trained, and that no one remembered Hakon fondly, and that the thanes he had once counted as allies had developed convenient amnesia about his name. He left again. He does not appear in the historical record after that. The sword is in a museum in Trondheim now. It's in a climate-controlled case with a placard that describes it as unique among Viking burial finds. Thousands of people walk past it every year. Most of them photograph it and move on. Occasionally, someone stops and looks at it for a long time, longer than a sword in a case usually holds a person's attention, and feels, without being able to say why, that the blade is not simply an artifact. That it is a message, that it was put there on purpose, that someone, a very long time ago, knew that you would find it, and wanted you to understand something. The cold reckoning always comes, not with fire, not with armies, with patience, with evidence, with the quiet, terrifying certainty of a woman who has already won, sitting at the high seat, watching you walk through her door. She already knows your name.